Hello, Acceleration Nation, and welcome to another Steer Your Career podcast. On today's episode, I have an assistant professor from Rutgers who is a seasoned PR professional and has authored 8 books. Mark Beal has given lots of advice to high schoolers going to college students going into the world and job seekers all over the world. We go into lots of great tips on how to build relationships authentically and mutually beneficially, and how to think about where you want to go in your career and how to get there. Before we head into that conversation, just want to remind you, if you are an ambitious professional and you are looking to accelerate your career to get a better job quickly, confidently, and with lots more money, that's what we do best here at Kadima Careers. And we do it in 2 different ways. We have a group coaching program, we have a personalized coaching program, and we do it in 3 ways. We offer a digital course that you can do all on your own, learn all our scripts, worksheets, framework that will get you more interviews, offers, and money. If you want to be part of a group and a community, you can join our group coaching program. And if you want a dedicated world-class coach that will work with you until you get that better job, we offer personalized coaching as well. You can check all of that out at kadimacareers.com, Kadima careers.com. And before we head into this episode, the last 3 words I will leave you with are own your career. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Steer Your Career podcast. On today's podcast, I'm very fortunate to have Mark Beal on the podcast here. And Mark will introduce himself briefly, but my PR agent for Kadima Careers, I think, has learned a lot from Mark in his career. But Mark, share with the Steer Your Career podcast a little bit about who you are and how you wound up on this podcast today.
Alan, first of all, thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. I follow your podcasts. I watch the episodes. I love the episodes, and I love the message that you're delivering out there to everybody, job seekers as well as those established in their careers. I'll make it quick. 30 years in public relations and marketing. All those years were with an agency in New York where we worked with major brands, major companies around high-profile sports and entertainment properties. So the Super Bowl, the Olympic Games, NCAA March Madness, the Rolling Stones. And so fun work, working with, again, big consumer brands, creating campaigns, activating those campaigns, working with CMOs and CEOs and heads of communication, and collaborating with the team at the agency. So it was all about a team effort, delivering measurable results each and every time. And then around 2013, Rutgers University, where I went to school and graduated from, said, would you like to teach a course in public relations? And I said, absolutely. I didn't know that 1 was going to turn to 2 and 2 were going to turn to 3. And next thing you know, in 2019, I became a full-time professor of practice at Rutgers University, where I teach 300, 400 and graduate level courses in public relations and marketing. But the career part of it began in, 2013, 14, 15, and 16. And after every class, and by email, and by text, students, how do I write my resume? How do I develop a cover letter? How do I conduct a job interview via phone versus in person? What do I wear to the interview? Do I write a thank you note after? Every single day. And not that they weren't getting those answers somewhere, but they were asking me, I guess, because at the time I was still working in the agency world. And when I was done class, I was going back to the agencies. I turned all those questions into 101 answers, which I wrote as lessons. And that was really the first book I wrote in 2017, 101 lessons they never taught you in college, which was really about how do you transition from college to career and all the things that I just discussed. And so that's been, again, in a nutshell, my kind of past 30 years. And now today, again, I am a full-time professor. So every day I'm collaborating with current and former students on their careers, whether that's to get their next job or to get their 3rd or 4th job in their career. And so that's what I do as my purpose in life now. It's not what my job is at Rutgers. My job is there to teach and collaborate with students, but my purpose is to help thousands upon thousands of students at Rutgers and well beyond with their career.
And is my PR agent, Ross, was he one of your students or?
No, he wasn't. He wasn't one of my students. He was actually one of my colleagues at the agency many years ago. Time flies, but let's just say sometime in the, 2010s, 2011s, 2012s, 13, somewhere in there. And as you talked about, it's all about relationships, right? And so as I teach my students or tell my students, you want to nurture relationships, right? You want to continue to nurture. So this nurturing. And so now Ross and I don't know, we're on team plus years of just collaborating, connecting, helping each other. And it's better than anyone. You never want to burn a bridge, right? You never want to burn a bridge because that relationship that maybe you've nurtured for 5, 10, 15 years, you burn that bridge, that relationship's over. So it's about nurturing and collaborating in a mutually beneficial way where we're always helping each other.
And the mutual beneficial way is so critical. And I work with a lot of clients that, whether they have a network or don't have a network, are often hesitant to build relationships, to go out and seek advice, and they feel that they're a burden. And I try to tell them that there's ways that you can also help others by reaching out to them in a mutually beneficial way. So I'd love to hear you expand on that a little bit, Mark.
It's true. And again, this applies to everything well beyond careers, right? But it's true. It's we can each help each other if we understand a little bit about what that other person is, attempting to do, whether it's career-wise, business-wise, goal-wise, whatever it might be. And so I love when I have a call. I just had one yesterday with a founder of a company, and he was calling me, picking my brain, trying to get a little bit of help. But when we got done, he said something really important. He said, okay, how can I help you now? And even though I didn't have a good answer for him, because I really didn't have something to give him, I just appreciated that after a 45-minute call in which I was attempting to help him, he didn't just hang up and say, thanks, talk to you later. He said, how can I help you? What can I do to help you? And so just that gesture alone, and by the way, I filed that away. I will probably in a week or 2 or 3 or a month or 2 or 3 will reach out to him and there'll be something, but just that consideration, that gesture that he said, you've just helped me. What can I do to help you? So that to me is part of that mutually beneficial. And it's not keeping a record. It's not keeping a scorecard. I've done 3 things for you. You've done nothing for me. It's not about that. It's just having the mentality and the mindset of, I can call you anytime. You can call me anytime. It may be to connect me with someone or connect you with someone. It may be, I need to brainstorm. You have 5 minutes for me. So it could be anything, but it's not about, again, scorekeeping and I'm up 3-0 or you're up 3-0. It's really just about this ongoing, we know we can always collect. I talk about my collaborators, and my collaborators are people like you, just people who we just feed off each other. We help each other, whatever it might be. And that's really important as part of that relationship nurturing.
Yeah. And Mark, that's a really important point. And I love that question that person asked you of like, how can they help you? That's something that we teach our clients in Kadima when you're having an informational interview where you're really meeting with someone with the goal to learn about them and their industry and seek advice. You also want to earn a referral. And one of the best ways to earn a referral is also be generous with your time and advice. So I always tell people as a last question, thanks a lot for the time and advice that you've given me. How can I ever help return the favor? How can I ever help you? And like just extending that offer, to your point, it's rarely needed, but it's always
always remembered, always appreciated, always valued. I completely agree with that. Because as I say this a lot, and I write it in my books, we'll talk about my books later, but I say 99% of people out there are what I call givers. And maybe I'm being too optimistic. Maybe it's not 99, but I do believe that most of us are givers, and we want to give of our time, our insights, our contacts, our experiences, our lessons learned. I really do believe that. And so I always say, be a giver. But as you're out there searching for your job or seeking your next opportunity, most folks out there want to help. They want to give. They want to help you get there.
Yeah, totally agree. Have you read the book Give and Take by Adam Grant?
I have not.
Okay. It's a good book. I don't think there's 99% givers. He probably actually quantifies it because he's good with that type of stuff. But it's an interesting take on there's givers, there's takers, and I think he calls it exchangers, maybe people that are just transactional. I think givers tend to do best over the course of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned a little bit about these books that you've written. Tell me which books you've written, and maybe we'll dig into some of the topics on 1 or 2 of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've authored 8 books. The first, like I said, in 2017, 101 lessons I never taught in college. And that was, I have what I just call a lot of light bulb moments. And so that was a light bulb moment one day after class. I'm like, getting all these questions. Let's convert the answers to the questions into these pithy 1-page lessons that students can just have this manual, this guide, and help them, whether it's the thank you note, the cover letter, the what do I wear? And so that started me on a journey of 8 books since 2017. And the latest book, which I'm really proud of, Win the Job and Thrive in a Multi-Generational Workplace. Now, in this book, I intentionally wanted to co-author with 2 other individuals. One, Frank Kovacs, who He started something called the Breakfast Club of New Jersey right after 9/11 because so many people out of work. And it's a all volunteer organization to help people secure their jobs. And now 25 years, 24, 23 years later, still going strong, has helped thousands upon thousands of people in the New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania area secure their next job. But it's purely a volunteer organization. And so I wrote Career in Transition with him back in 2019, just before the pandemic. And when the pandemic came around and we said, wow, this is transforming the workplace overnight, around March of 2020, we said, let's write a book now. We started writing that and then put it on the back burner. And then in 2024, this book just came out, Win the Job and Thrive in a Multi-Generational Workplace. So I guess we'll call those two kind of career books. And then there's 4 books on Generation Z, Decoding Gen Z, Engaging Gen Z Graduates to Adulthood, and ZEO, which is actually over my head, I think, ZEO, Introducing Gen Z, the New Generation of Leaders. So 4 of those books that are in there as well, which really talk about this, the new generation in the workplace. And I say that with a smile because some people don't know the exact ages, but the oldest Gen Zers this year turned 27. They're not 17, 18, 19 anymore, 27. And some of them might be in their 4th or 5th year in their career, and they could already be mid-level managers or supervisors. Gen Zers are not only in middle school and high school and college, but we have some who could be 4 years, almost 5 years into their career.
I know loosely the definition, but what's the definition of Gen Z? What years are you born?
Yeah, absolutely. I lean on Pew Research Center sets generational years. And so a couple of years ago, they set 1997 as the first birth year for Generation Z, which was where we get to the idea that the oldest will turn 27 this year. They haven't set the last birth year, and they probably won't for a couple of years. I use 2012, so I kind of use a 15-year window, 97 to 2012. So your youngest Gen Zers would be turning 12 this year. So they're in 6th grade, right? 6th grade, 7th grade. So middle school, we'll say. We won't get into it today, but right behind them and moving fast is Gen Alpha. So Gen Alpha, age 0 to 11. I just saw a week ago or 2 weeks ago, Dove has already come out with a campaign specifically around Gen Alpha, which in some cases is a little scary because, again, Gen Alpha is so young. But before you know it, Gen Alpha will be in their teens and in high school and in college and joining the workforce. But for now, Gen Z are the new generation in the workplace.
Was there ever a Gen Y? I'm Gen X.
I think so I think millennials, they go by Gen Y / millennials. Right. Some people just call them Gen Y. And interesting you bring that point up. So this was out of curiosity. By the way, I'm an Xer. So if we have Xers, we have Y, we have Z, and then we're back at Alpha. Gen Alpha.
Before X, is that boomers or?
Boomers are boomers. Gen X is right around, I'm on the older end of Gen X. Boomers are, let's just say boomers, I'm just rounding off now. Let's just say boomers are more 60-ish, right? Into the 70s. Then the silent generation is late 70s, 80s. But I was curious, even though they're not here yet, since Gen Alpha is 0 to 11, I was just curious, what's the next? And of course, it's Gen Beta. So Gen Beta, who won't be here for another couple of years. Right. That is the generation after Gen Alpha when they are born in another, let's just say 2, 3, 4 years.
I fundamentally don't believe that there's much of a difference by the generation, but more by the years of experience. So someone new to the workforce has different expectations and different or very little experience. So they're going in and they have no idea whether it's Gen X when I went into the workplace in like 1995 or my parents did in the 1970s or whatever. What have you seen to be unique about Gen Z, and what do they need to think of? What do they need to do differently to win that job?
Yeah, first of all, I completely agree with you, right? No matter what generation we were, you and I, Gen X, when we started, we were the newbies, right? So didn't matter, I started full-time in 89. So we were still the newbies. We were Gen Xers then. I don't even know if we called ourselves Gen Xers, but either way, we were Gen Xers then and we're still Gen Xers. So I always say this, and I just, a couple of days ago for an article, older generations, and I don't want to call you and I older generation, but more experienced, we'll say, more experienced generations. That's exactly what we have. We have lots of experience. We've got lots of lessons learned. We have lots of successes. We have vast networks. Gen Z doesn't have any of that. Right. They have no experience, very few lessons learned, probably no success stories, and small networks. And you raised the question, but they still bring value. And so, great quote. I wish it was mine. It wasn't, but it's from the former CMO of MTV. Gen Z is the first generation that learned to swipe before they wiped. They've had technology in their hands since the age of 1, 2, 3, or 4. They are tech savvy. They are digital natives. Again, I can point the finger at me and say an old Gen Xer, right? They may come to me and say, hey, I've got a solution. Have we thought of using this? How about this? Maybe we use Slack instead of email. It's more efficient, right? They'll come to you with that. So they'll challenge the status quo. They'll introduce new platforms, technologies, those sort of things. They definitely look at a problem solving maybe in a different way and say, have we thought of this? Have we tried this? Right? Those kinds of things. So I think that's what they bring, some of that new thinking, new technology, an incredible entrepreneurial mindset and spirit. Again, they don't have the experience. They don't have the networks. They don't have the lessons learned. So together, I think all generations collaboratively, they bring value that I always say 1 + 1 = 3. And I do believe that.
The interesting thing is back when I was young as a Gen X instead of old as a Gen X, I also had no network. And the way I got my first jobs was the first one, I just walked into the local grocery store in my neighborhood. One of my next ones was nepotism for my Aunt Sammy. So like it was through my network, but my network was very condensed to where I was around. Now with the power of LinkedIn, the power of the internet, we can reach out to and establish ties with anybody in the world if you know how to do it. I think Gen Z is much more empowered, but they may not know that they have that power, build those relationships, and seek out advice. I'm curious how you think of that, or what your perspective is about that.
Yeah, I actually tell them they have a superpower that we did not have. And I'm obviously a few years older than you, and I don't want to go back to the old days, but when I graduated college, there was no LinkedIn. There was no email. There was no email when I graduated college. It was old-fashioned networking. It was good old-fashioned, pick up the phone, face-to-face, one-on-one meetings. There was no podcast, no Zooms, none of it. And so to your point, I remember my first, I had lots of jobs like everyone else when they were younger. I mowed lawns and delivered newspapers and all that. But my first, I'll call it real job, was sophomore year in high school. There was an ad in the local weekly newspaper in Belmar, New Jersey, which is the Jersey Shore, that said sports editor wanted. And my mom said, she knew I loved media and all that. She goes, you got to go apply for that job. They're not going to hire some sophomore in high school for, I guess I was the only one to apply because I walked into the office, found the guy who was in charge and said, hey, I'm applying for this job. He goes, you got the job. Nobody else responded to the ad. And I became the sports editor of a weekly newspaper at the Jersey Shore. But to your point, there was no email. I wasn't on LinkedIn. It was just knock on the door like you did, go in, introduce myself. And I guess he saw something in me and said, this guy seems like he's mature for a sophomore in high school, let's hire. So, but today you've got so much, as you said, channels and content and ways. LinkedIn for sure, not even a question, but I've got students who even will use Instagram and they'll DM someone through Instagram. Maybe they're seeing their content around, I'm making it up, a passion area like fashion or beauty or sports, and they'll DM through that. Of course, LinkedIn is a whole treasure chest of opportunity there. So I do believe that many of them recognize that, see that, and understand it. I think some don't realize the power and the opportunity and the power for connection through platforms like LinkedIn and others. And so that's something that I had the opportunity right before spring break to go into a freshman. I don't have any courses where I teach freshmen. I teach mostly junior, seniors, and grad students. And so I went in, and one of the first things I just said was, I'm not going to raise a show of hands, but each and every one of you should have a LinkedIn profile, and each and every one you should continue to evolve that. You should continue to share thought leadership, whether that's sharing articles or creating your own posts, and use that platform as a powerful connection over the course of the next 4 years, well before you're going to graduate. In today's world, we've got so many resources, and even like going back to LinkedIn, research is even easier now to find connections, find alums from your school who work at a company that you want to go work for, right? We didn't have this, you and I, at our fingertips in, we'll just say, the early 90s.
Yeah. And you didn't ask for a show of hands, but when you were in the classroom, what's your gut tell you of how many people were on LinkedIn or familiar with LinkedIn at that age? And what age were those students?
So those were freshmen, because I was asked to guest lecture in a class of freshmen, and so they would be 18 and 19. When I talk about Gen Z, I talk about, especially when I present to marketers, I talk about the big three. And the big three are TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube from a marketing perspective. But I actually put LinkedIn, if I was going to say there's a big four, I do think, and hopefully you agree, but I do think LinkedIn over the last 5, 6, 7, 10 years has become much more of a engagement platform, thought leadership content platform, sharing platform. Years ago, and again, hopefully you'll agree, years ago, you and I would go to a conference, we'd meet each other. Hey, Alan, great to meet you. Connection. We'd never talk again. Now, I do think we're sharing, we're commenting, we're just communicating more, I think, through platforms like LinkedIn. I know every day I'm on there all day long. And so I am seeing more and more students at a younger age are saying, yes, I actually am on LinkedIn. Yes, I am posting content. Yes, I am in connections. About 4 or 5 times a year, I get invited to high schools, and specifically to what they call, at least in New Jersey, a couple of high schools are what they call business academies. So within the high school, They have students who are part of a business academy and freshman through senior. And again, maybe those students have a slightly different approach because they're part of a business academy. So they're already getting internships as sophomores, juniors, and seniors in high school, believe it or not. And when I go in there, most of those students do have LinkedIn profiles, but I think that's because of the academy and the coursework, and it's part of, not a requirement, but part of what they're encouraged to do even as freshmen, sophomores, and high schools to establish a LinkedIn presence.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of LinkedIn, similar to how some of those students might have first heard about LinkedIn from your classroom instruction. I first heard about it in business school. I was fortunate enough to have gone to a good business school. A professor mentioned it to us April 1st, 2004. So I've been on LinkedIn for more than 99.96% of people. So I'm a big fan, and it really is, it's overwhelming with what value and capability it provides you. It's not a panacea, but it does give you access to almost every professional in the world. Not that you're going to get a response from all, but you'll be surprised how many you actually do get a response from and
Yes.
can forge relationships with.
Yeah. By the way, you've got an anniversary coming up in a week. You've got your 20th anniversary on LinkedIn coming up.
I know. I'm thinking about my posts for that too. I'm excited about that. So this is a little bit of selfishness for me. I have two boys that are going to college next year. You wrote a book.
Lessons they never taught you in college.
Yes, 101 lessons they never taught you in high school about going to college.
That book too.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who got the title wrong. You don't need to go through 101, but what should I be telling my boys? What should people out there listening be telling their kids, or if their kids listening going to college, what should they be thinking about as they head off to college?
It's interesting. So I mentioned I've authored 8 books. Believe it or not, that's the best-selling book. I can in real time see all my books and how many have been sold, and that's by far, it's not even close. So that book, that was inspired by the very first book, 101 Lessons They Ever Taught You in College. After that book came out and media were calling me and interviewing me, I said, maybe there's a second book idea here. So I just did a nationwide one question to college students. Just said, what advice would you give to a high school senior going to college? That was it. It was literally a sentence within minutes, emails. I will tell you the number one piece of advice. And so in some sense, that book was published, I think, in 2018, maybe 2019. So pre-pandemic, I almost feel like I need to do a new version of that book in 2025. Number one piece of advice, never skip class. That came in over and over and over. And the point is, and you know this, and I know this, college for most is going to be their first taste of freedom, right? First time for most not living at home. First time for most having to make decisions like, do I want to wake up and go to that 8:30 a.m. class or 9 a.m. class? High school, you probably didn't have to worry too much about that because maybe mom or dad made sure you got to school and got to class. So that was the one piece of advice that came over and over and over, never skip class. And so it may sound simple, but it's important because, as again, you know what I know. You skip one class, you miss something. You missed a lecture, you missed an assignment, you missed an important announcement. Skip another class, now you've got a snowball effect. Where at least if you're in the class, even if you're not a proactive participant, you're hearing, you're listening, you're there, you're in the midst. So that was the first piece of advice, was that. The second part, which builds on that, is don't just attend class. Be a proactive participant, meaning just in the last 3 days, I've had a VP of comms from Citibank come into my class, former student. I've had a head of senior social media specialist at T-Mobile come into my class. I've had 2 leaders in influencer marketing come in. You're a student. You've got these people in your class. First of all, they want to come into the class, those guest speakers. I'm not twisting their arm, but you've got them. Not just when they're up there, but when they're done speaking, everyone leaves. You could have one-on-one with them for 15, 20, 25 minutes. So that's the idea of being a proactive participant. Just take advantage of everything that's right in front of you, whether in the classroom or some sort of lecture that's happening in the library later that week. There's just so much going on campuses. And I think the point is, don't just kind of lock yourself in your room, and get out there, collaborate, connect. And as you know better than anybody, the individuals that are your classmates who are in certain classes, especially when you get to your major, they may be contacts of yours for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. I have, former student colleagues of mine, classmates of mine now. One is an anchor on Fox News. I talk to him, or I'm in touch with him almost every day. Another is a national radio show host on 350 radio stations across America. I'm in touch with him on a weekly basis. These are people who I was in college with at age 19, 20, and 21, but we maintain the connection.
Yeah, the college relationships are key, and I still have great relationships with lots of the friends that I made at Binghamton. You also have this book, which you properly named, and I got confused, The 100 Lessons They Never Taught You in College. So this is like the next step. You wrote this book about getting into from high school to college and then from college to life. what were some of the key pieces of feedback there?
Absolutely. And again, I'm not trying to promote, but just a little story on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 101 lessons they never taught in college, that was about 2017, 2018. And as the pandemic arrived and the workplace transformed and all the things that went with that, we went from in-person to remote, and now some companies are completely remote, some are hybrid, all those kinds of things in technology. I started getting the itch in 23, and I said, okay, that 2017 book, while it's still a nice book, it's not timely with 2024 and 2025. And so I took some of those lessons, things like thank you notes, still found its way in this book because thank you notes are really important. And every guest speaker who comes in still talks about thank you notes. Recently, I had 2 guest speakers who said, we were down to 2 candidates after we interviewed everybody. One sent a thank you, the other didn't. The one that didn't get the job, the one that did got the job. So some of those lessons are here. But what I did was in early 23, one of my former students, Kadir Porter, is now a full-time executive recruiter for a major global company. And I said, let's have lunch. And so we sat, what I thought was going to be 30, 40 minutes, ended up, I think, being 2 hours. And I just picked his brain because as the candidate, I don't really have access to understand behind the scenes the recruiter. What's the process? What are they thinking? Are they going through manually through these resumes? Are they using an applicant tracking system? All those things. But as a recruiter, you know all this. You know the behind the scenes, the inside. And so I just started picking his brain over lunch. We got done lunch and said, hey, this book that I started writing in 2020, we're going to write it, but you're now a co-author on this book because you have so many insights from that perspective. And so the Win the Job and Thrive in a Multi-Generational Workplace now is the 2024-25 version of how do you secure the job? How do you win the job today? Some of those lessons, though, from 2017 about thank you notes and about the difference between a phone interview versus an in-person are still in there. But there's so much more now about the things that you talk about all the time about strategically researching, identifying, ranking prospects and target companies. And then how do you get a foot in those and how do you network and make connections that you can, as you said, get the referral to the point where maybe you never even apply for the job because you've worked it so well that now you're being referred to something and your resume is going in before there's even a job posting. So this book, the new book, covers all of those things in today's 2024, 2025 kind of landscape.
Yeah, I think that's so critical. Also, thank you note has this time. It used to be like a mailed, maybe handwritten note.
Yes, now it's
mail will suffice, or even like a LinkedIn message will suffice.
Yes,
but even that appreciation, it always amazed me. I've interviewed probably 2,000 people in my career, and I would say less than 10% send a thank you note. And early on in my career, I used to actually ding, like I would eliminate someone who did not write a thank you note. And I think it used to be more prevalent back then when I did this. Was when I was at American Express. And then a boss of mine told me to get over myself and stop eliminating people from that. And I wound up hiring a great person who I almost dinged because he didn't write a thank you note. But then I hired him at Google and he wrote me a thank you email there. So he learned from that feedback. But what is different now for people that are winning the job and now thriving in a multi-generational workplace? Are there things that are different, and what are you hearing or seeing yourself that's different now than the challenges that we had to deal with back in like 1990s?
There are many, but we'll start with one because we're doing it right now. This idea of video conferencing. More and more interviews are being conducted via video conference, right? So you're not going into, let's just say pre-2020. You might have had a phoner first with the recruiter. Hey, we like you. We need you to come in now. And you make the trek into the company, whether it's in the big city or somewhere else. And you're doing all those face-to-face, right? You're going from executive to executive. You may even sit in a group session. Now that doesn't exist, but it's really heavy on the video conferencing front now, whether that's with one or more. Again, in the book, but even this past week, I've probably prepped 5 to 7 students on, I helped them prep for video conference interviews this week, including a couple have them today. And so there's an art to all elements of it. One, and I know I'm not the right example now because I do have things behind me, but one is just the quality of the video, as you said, audio, the video, all those kinds of things. 2, what's in the background. Now, intentionally for this call, I have that book in the background, but for an interview, you don't want something distracting the background because the recruiter or what is that poster back there? And you also don't want people running around and yelling and screaming, all those things. So there's what I call just the staging of the interview. But then there's the most important thing is the quality of the interview, the engagement of the interview. You want to convert that interview into a conversation. And so with each and every student who I help prep for the interview, I said, here's what we need to do. We've got to conduct deep research over the next several days. You need to start that call with Thank you, Alan. And oh, by the way, I just saw that you made a major announcement 5 days ago. Congratulations on the acquisition. Right away, you've just shown that you've done your research. You've also shown that you've got some people skills, and you're a master in what I call HI, human interaction, as opposed to if you get on the call and they're like, hello, yes, no. I don't even know if you can recover after that. So that icebreaker, I always say that first 5, 10, 15 seconds when two strangers get on the call, and let's just say one is the interviewer and the other is the interviewee, you need to proactively break the ice in a productive, smart, strategic way, because if not, it can be very awkward. And so that, to me, it's that I get off on the right foot right away. And the way to do that is through some sort of insight that came out of your research about something that just occurred with this organization, this company, even this individual. Hey, John, I see we both went to Rutgers University. I see you were a communicator. I'm like that kind of thing too.
Yeah. And you exhibited those habits exactly as we joined this podcast. You were complimentary to our podcast and so forth. So you're exhibiting the same thing that you're teaching your students. Good for you.
I don't know if you'd agree with this, Alan, because I'm fascinated by everything you do and all the topics you cover. Lately, I've been using this, and again, maybe I shouldn't be. You may tell me I'm wrong, but lately I've been saying hard skills get you the interview, soft skills win you the job. And what I mean by that is I do a lot of resume reviews and revisions, and again, just as my way of giving back. And when I see in skills, communication, first of all, I'm like, what does that even mean? Organization, that's your opinion, you might be organized. We all have, right? But when I see Canva, SEO, a video editing app that you actually know and have used and done, that's pretty interesting. I want to learn more about that. These are what I call hard skills. But when you get on the call, you then need to get those soft skills. So you do need to effectively show that you can communicate, right, one-on-one, that you can carry a conversation. And that's where I get into those kind of soft skills. Could be what decides who does win the job, because at the end of the day, I do believe that the interviewers will say, I really love the conversation with that candidate from that university. And that may be the deciding factor, or a deciding factor.
I'll partly agree with you. I agree that the soft skills definitely land you the job. So once you're in that interview, it lands you the job. On the hard skills make you eligible for the interview, but
that's right. Yeah.
You need the soft skills to land that interview, because you're not the only one with the Canvas skills. You're not the only one that coded in Python. You're not the only one who went to UPenn. So then the soft skills help to lift you up amongst the mass of other people with those hard skills.
No, you and I are on the same page. Exact same thing. So what's on paper will get you hopefully into the mix. In consideration, but then you've got to really leverage those soft skills when you're having it. It's just like you and I having this dialogue, right? You could be interviewing me, and at the end, you're either going to say, really love that conversation, or didn't sense it. Let's move on to the next candidate.
I'd hire you, Mark.
Thank you.
Great. Cool. With that, we're wrapping up on time. So I do want to ask 2 more questions of you. You've given lots of great advice here all throughout, but if you have to leave our audience with one more piece of sick career advice, what would it be, Mark?
That's a tough one, because I could offer so many, but I guess I'll boil it down to something I tell my students, and I borrow this from Ted Lasso. Be consistently curious and ask questions. So whether that's in the class, whether that's a guest speaker, whether that's a informational / cup of coffee meeting, those questions to me lead to answers that open doors to opportunities. And so I could have given you a bunch more, but that's the one I'm going to stick with now. Ted Lasso, when he's the famous scene where he's playing darts, and he said, if you'd asked questions, you would have known that I played darts when I was a young boy, and those kinds of things. So be consistently curious and ask questions.
That's great advice. Great show, although I wasn't so fond of the final season. But last question, Mark, where can people find you? How can people support you?
LinkedIn, of course, is like you. I live on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. I love showing content. I also love consuming your content and content from so many others. So, of course, LinkedIn. I have a website, markbealspeaks.com. And on that site are just articles and interviews I've done and speeches and things like that. But LinkedIn is definitely my favorite place where I am. I don't mean on there all day, but I'm on there all day because I want to consume a lot of content and share content.
Awesome. And you need to get your new book up there on your website. Because
I do. I got to get that. Yes, this book just came out about January 4th. So I do need to get it out there. It's not up there.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Mark. I'm glad that Ross put the two of us together. I learned a lot of tips. I'm going to share some with my boys, and they won't listen from me, but I'll be like, hey, this is from a Rutgers professor. You should listen up.
And you can always put them in contact with me. Love to help them out.
Awesome, Mark. Thanks a lot, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it.